Albert, thank you for coming to the show.
Thank you for having me.
We are here to talk about your journey in startup land. You've had a non-linear and quite irregular career so far, and you're doing something that I consider remarkable, solving a huge pain for people I deeply care about. So we're going to discuss that. And before we go in any deeper, can you please tell us who you are, what do you do, and why do you do it?
Of course, my name is Albert de Simmons Azis-Clauson.
Albert de Simmons Azis-Clauson.
Exactly, yes. I am the CEO and co-founder of UnderPinned, which is a kind of one-stop solution for freelancers and clients. It's a subscription-based service that basically lets you do everything from proposal to payment in one place, from attached to everything to like accounting, insurance, so you can literally log in and have your whole career sorted in one single virtual office. And that's both for the clients and the freelancers. We've been running for about a year and a half now, started in August 2018, and things have moved very quickly. I started it because before this I did PR and business strategy consultancy, mostly for kind of bigger businesses, but I also ran a media and arts company and arts charity, which is very focused on helping young and emerging artists. So I spent a lot of time with, I guess, the kind of biggest problem group in this area, which were kind of the hardcore creatives who were very, very focused on their craft and not particularly focused on the business side, particularly kind of fine artists who would see the way in which they present themselves, the way in which they present their business was very focused on the thing they were producing and not who they were producing it for. But what it meant was I spent a lot of time teaching people how to build a business around an art, around a craft. And slowly but surely that kind of crept into a wider pool of people. And it started in the art world and then became, graphic designers and then marketeers and then consultants. And then I realized that I was doing exactly the same thing for myself as a consultant for big business. And the bigger businesses I was working for, I was like, actually, these are exactly the same set of problems. They're just in a more complex system. But anyway, that's what then led to what UnderPinned is now.
There is a mix of art and science to your work. There's the passion, there's the I feel this is something big, and there's the part that says I've experienced that problem and I wanna be a part of solving for it. How did you transition into entrepreneurship? Did you have a full-time job when you started UnderPinned?
No, I had a really weird transition in that I went straight from doing the consultancy and running the media and arts thing. The media and arts thing was much more of a passion project. Like I don't think. I hoped it would be a business that could make a lot of money. I'm not 100% sure I really believed that it could be from where it was at the time. So I went straight from just doing consultancy, which I was doing fairly full time. I was doing kind of 3 to 5 days a week most weeks, so fairly full time, to doing UnderPinned. I think it was, so July was when we first sat down, 2018. Me and my business partner sat down and said, okay, this is a thing we want to do, but right now it's just an idea. Let's sketch it out. And then August, we incorporated, and then October 1st, we drew down the first bit of cash, which made it a full-time job where I was paying myself. So it was a very quick process from this is the thing that we want to do to this is how we're going to do it. So, oh my God, okay, we're actually doing it. There wasn't really a transition period. It just kind of, I stopped doing everything I was doing and I started doing UnderPinned. And so, yeah, so it was pretty much from day one, it was my full-time job.
What does day one in a non-existent company look like?
A couple games of chess, hilarious chit chat, sitting in a room or a coffee shop, kind of desperately going through your to-do list, wondering what you can actually achieve, rereading emails and realizing that it didn't make any sense or you don't understand what you're talking about. More hilariously actually is looking back now on day one emails sent and going, oh my God, I can't believe I sent.
Do you have one at hand?
I don't. And I think the ones that I really thought were bad were always contractual stuff, which I probably wouldn't be able to talk about anyway. But I remember reading emails that I was sending to lawyers about, share structures or some kind of little thing about the investment we were raising and being like, oh my God, I'm lucky that we managed to not get completely done over by somebody, because the learning curve on the kind of financial and admin side is so steep in a startup. I think that when you start, you're saying the art and science thing, okay, you've got this passion, this idea, this thing you want to do, this market you want to operate in, and that's particularly interesting, but there's a whole other side to it that you learn very quickly and very harshly, particularly if you get money very early on in the process, where you suddenly got, I remember having an hour conversation with an accountant about pension responsibilities and being like, what? Like, I'm a month into a startup, why am I talking about pension responsibilities with a really serious dude? But yeah, I think that there's the day one, it doesn't, I don't know, it's kind of, I guess day one is trying to put everything together and be like, okay, this needs to make sense and be organized.
What dictated your priorities in day one?
I had and still have a very strict regime about the way that I work. So I would I would get up and I would work out, these are the things that need to occur for the business to survive and operate as like a basic. These are the things I think I need to do in order to improve the business. And these are the things that I want to do around the business. And what I would do is I'd write out task lists for each of those categories. And it wouldn't necessarily be as organized as like columns, but I would write them out with those things in mind. And then I would basically check off those like small tasks. I mean, the biggest thing was always about breaking tasks down into tiny bite-sized chunks, because any time somebody says I want to build something, usually the thing you want to build is almost unapproachable. It's usually way too big. A vision is not something you can actually achieve.
You can build a vision.
Yeah, so, and I kind of, whenever I talk to you about how to do, and it's the same with freelancing, the people that we work with, but it's the same with startups. You say, okay, you've got a vision, you know what you want to achieve, you know where you want to go, and that's the thing that's driving you, the kind of passion bit. Put that to the side for a second, because you can't achieve that, and find out, what can I do today, a series of tasks that I can actually go and achieve and work through in a day. So I think that a lot of it was going, okay, how do I make a priority list? Well, right, I need to do all these things. I don't know how to do these things, so there, I can't do them. So I can just gonna tick through the things that I know I can actually do, and then another task is to find someone who can help me do the things that I don't know how to do.
Sounds so nice and tidy and clear. And now talk to me about what really happened.
So I mean, there was.
He's like, this part of the pitch is not rehearsed.
No, so I'm thinking like, what went wrong and why did it go wrong? And I think that actually, kind of my perspective of it was, I don't think there were any kind of horrendous mistakes or blunders that occurred, but there was this kind of constant incremental learning where at the time you're like, wow, I'm nailing this, and then you look back and you're like, I was not nailing that, right? So I think that the mistakes, the kind of what actually happened at the time, I think I genuinely was like, I'm doing this all right, like this is exactly what I should be doing. I'm working really hard, I'm checking things off my checklist, I'm talking to the right people,
I prioritize, I delegate.
But then you look back and you're like, wow, I prioritize all of the wrong things. So I mean, when I started, I had this really strict regime. I'd get up super early, I'd be in the office like 4 hours before anyone else, I would write out a huge checklist of things to do, I would feel really organized about it. But I think that the biggest thing was, what really happened was, you'd 100% have no idea what you're doing. And I think even if you've done a few startups before,
100% you don't know what you're doing.
Yeah, like I think that like you go into this feeling really confident, and whether it's your first startup, your third startup, I imagine it's very similar. But you go in feeling really confident, but I think you have to be aware that you are not. You're 100%. No one knows what it is. The thing I've learned the most in being business at all is whether you're talking to somebody who's 60 and done it for 50 years since they were 10, or you're 3 years in. Like you both have no idea what you're actually doing, and it's actually it is always those little tiny tasks that you can do well. But as an overarching thing, no one is massively more insightful than anyone else. And I think that what really happened is a really, really harsh learning curve over quite a long period of time.
We had a guest on the show, and she has her own startup, and we talked about reducing uncertainties, and we had time management strategies, we had all of those things, we had how to reduce availability, but the one piece of advice we missed out on is breaking things down to like achievable, actionable things you can actually make progress on. And it's a huge tip when we're talking about that ailment of the startup world. And then you said another thing, which was even in your second or third startup experience, you might not necessarily know what it is that you're doing.
Yeah, I think that there's this kind of like, I mean, have you must know like the Lean Startup, the book, right? And that was the most depressing book I've ever read, because it's obviously it's a very important book in the startup world. It's a very a lot of people kind of use it as a Bible, particularly for tech. But it's very kind of the Silicon Valley attitude of as lean and as like kind of, I don't know, unemotional, as clean cut and as sterile as humanly possible to iterate towards success. And I think that when you're looking at a startup, that, like you said, the art and science, and it keeps coming back to that, there's all this like passion, this is what I want to do, but actually some of the processes are quite analytical. And I think that if you're in your second and third startup, you can learn those processes really well. Like you can learn like how to make your team more efficient. Don't hire juniors. Like one of the things that people say, they always learn from their first startup. Hire senior, you spend more money, but you get someone who knows how to do those processes. And there's a lot to be said for that. But the truth is, especially, I mean, like, a whole point of a startup is to disrupt something. If you're a startup and you're not changing something, then you're just the same business as something else, you're unlikely to be very successful. So if you're disrupting something, you're changing something, you're operating in what is by definition an unknown space because it's changing, right? So you don't know what's going to happen. And I think that, you know, whenever we look at global economics and we look at economists who are predicting what's going to happen, it's so rare that people are right about what's going to happen. And then 10 years later, somebody says, this guy was right. Yeah, but he was one of 100 people and he was the only one that got even close to what it was like. So,
and no one listened to him because
right, because he was crazy. And so I think that it's a very similar thing, that you can get better at those individual processes. And like the learning curve that I think I will take away from this will be the legal language, the accounting language, the way in which you operate a business from a financial perspective, the kind of the more admin related stuff. But the actual operation of a new idea is inherently novel every time. And therefore, yeah, you can't know what you're doing.
It's a great way to manage expectations because yes, you will know how to read a contract. You will know how to build a more beneficial hiring process. But the business itself, the customer acquisition, the product, the performance, the exit strategy, these are things that remain unknown and uncertain as you're building them.
Yeah. And I think that's also why people always say they back people and not ideas. I think when people are talking to me about how to raise money, one of the things I often say is, okay, kind of put your idea to the side a second, kind of forget your idea, because actually the reason someone's going to give you cash is because they think you are the person to do this and they think that there's an opportunity in the market. Because especially in the first few years of your business, you know, pre-Series A, no one expects your business to look anything like you thought it would look when you started. When you first write that business plan, people expect that to change massively over the course of your first few years.
Expect is the key word, because when you sign a term sheet for an investment, there has to be wiggle room. There has to be a mutual understanding that this might not be what we think it is, but it has to be a ripe market with a good team.
Yeah, and that's the thing. And I think being able to have that confidence in the person and in the market and in what the startup could be is what investors are really looking for. And I think that one of the biggest issues, you know, going back to the thing of saying higher experience and you can learn the processes. One of the reasons that VCs love to back founders who have done 3 startups, even if they were all failures, is that they know that founder knows those processes. So although all of the unknown stuff around the business is going to change and maybe it won't work, maybe it will, you know, we talked about mitigating risk, like trying to show that you've got alternative plans, that there's a redundancy built in. If you know that somebody's good at those processes, when it does come time to pivot or it does come time to cut half the team out and restructure, that they have like some sort of oversight of how to do it.
There are reasons that it's okay if a business fails because of, and there's the reasons that feel like we should have known better.
It's a really difficult question because hindsight is a great thing. You know, everybody says, you know, you look back, oh, I see why that business failed. But when you're in the driving seat of these things, you think everything moves very quickly, but actually things move quite slowly, and it's a long iterative process to get these things right. And there are so many places where mistakes can be made. And there's kind of 2 types of mistakes, and there's probably loads more, but 2 that pop to mind. One is the kind of fork in the road. Where are you going to go with the business? So we need to make a decision. Once we've made that decision, we can't possibly know whether the other one was better or worse because we never tried it, right? And then you have the mistakes that are like, okay, these guys forgot to file for their VAT, so they didn't get the cash back in the first month, and that meant that they were a month behind on a payment, and then they were chasing themselves, and there was a whole issue. And I think that it's very easy to mess up admin, because especially because it's the most boring part of running and doing anything. And those mistakes are the ones you have to avoid. You have to just put your head down. You have to learn, which is why I do all of my admin and the stuff that I don't want to do first thing in the morning. The first thing I do is that.
How many podcasts did you do over the course of your professional life?
4 or 5, I think.
How many of them were about admin?
None.
Okay. Maybe there should be a podcast called Paperweight.
Yeah.
The mental weight of admin on your life.
Yeah. Well, this is actually a really good point because it's directly relevant to the business that I've run. So our like fundamental core business proposition is we do admin for you. Where that admin, some of it might be more fun, like proposal building and portfolio building, but a lot of it is like, you know, contacts management, project management. Project management is a nice way of saying time management and task management.
And energy management.
Yeah. And then you've got contracts and invoices. So you have this kind of like And that's before even talking about insurance and accounting and the really dry stuff. But these things are so important, but they're things you don't want to do. And a big part of our business is actually how do we create a proposition around something inherently boring that people don't want to engage with, that is engaging and interesting. And I think it's exactly the same, with a startup, that actually there is a great sense of achievement that you feel when you successfully tick things off a to-do list. Like I loved maths at school. I loved maths. But the reason I love maths is the just sense of like almost adrenaline in solving a maths problem. And I think it's very similar with admin. Admin is something you don't want to do, but getting through admin tasks and then seeing that you're in a better place because of it is a very nice feeling. So yeah, maybe there should be a podcast on admin, but we can make it fun.
Anyone who'd ever missed out on a big admin task and it came back to beat them in the ass, it knows.
Yeah.
100%.
And you can't. What's really weird about it though is if you didn't do something and it comes back to bite you, you still don't want to do that thing. That's the really weird thing about it. Like you still know that you kind of like. There's sometimes you're almost like, yeah, but I really didn't want to spend 4 hours going through accounts. So like, I know I've been charged for this, but like that's really terrible. But also, I still don't want to do that task.
How quickly after setting out with UnderPinned did the not sexy parts of the work had taken over the schedule? When did you have to start giving up on building the product and finding customers and building a brand into like, God damn those invoices, God damn those pension plans?
Yeah, so it ebbed and flowed a bit. And whenever raising money and whenever actually in the process of raising investment, you almost turn off from the business completely, which I always think is really ironic because the people you're talking to are the people who want to see that you get your business, but your job becomes just talking to those people about the business that you're not really involved in at the time, which is a very strange, weird, like little dichotomy. But I think that day one, I made a massive, massive effort to try and spend a lot of time learning about the boring stuff that I didn't know. So I think that I kind of almost front-loaded a lot of the work I didn't want to do, which I think actually is probably the way to do this stuff. Like, you do the stuff you do. You eat the bit on your plate you don't want to eat first, so you can save, whatever it is for last. When I first started, I put a lot of time at the beginning doing really boring work and like learning about pensions, learning about accounting, learning about the legal side, learning about share structures, so that when I was having those conversations, I felt like I was part of them rather than just listening to somebody tell me something.
What does dealing with the boring stuff look like physically? I want to know what it was like. Where were you sitting? What were you doing? How long were you doing it?
So from day one, I would sit down for maybe 2-3 hours a day and just read government websites, accounting textbooks, law textbooks.
All the things I would try my very best to avoid.
Yeah, and I would just like literally put my head in it and go through it. And I wouldn't necessarily read it in massive detail, but I would read it to the point where I'd go, okay, EIS, I now know what EIS investment is. I am confident that I could explain it to somebody.
Educate us.
So in the UK, you have EIS and SEIS, which is Seed Enterprise Investment Scheme, and the Enterprise Investment Scheme, which are effectively tax breaks for investors, private investors in early stage companies. And what it means is if you invest at SEIS, which is the first £150,000 of investment a company gets, you get 50% back as a tax break, and then I think it's up to a further 22.5% or something around that you get back if the company fails.
Which is also important to negotiate, because when a person says, "Oh, I'm giving you $150,000," you're actually you're giving me 75.
Yeah, exactly. Although that can actually be dangerous as well. In fact, when we were talking to investors in the early stages, a lot of people said, like, make sure EIS, when you're talking about these tax schemes, it's the last thing you tell them, because if you go into a conversation saying, hey, we've got an EIS opportunity for you, and EIS is up to £5 million a year and up to £12 million of your first investment, and you get a 30% tax back. So if you go into that conversation saying, hey, I've got an EIS investment for you, the person is thinking, this person's coming to me with a tax break opportunity. If you go into the conversation and say, hey, I've got a great business for you, and just by the way, you'll get 30% of whatever you invest back, it becomes a point of like, you were going to invest 70k, now you're going to invest 100k kind of thing. And actually, if you go in with the mentality that that's extra, it's just a bonus on top of what is a great opportunity, it's a way better way of thinking about it.
Under promise, over deliver. That's the key to most things in life. So sorry, I interrupted your flow of the day, but Yeah, there, even in the most boring things, there come all these nuggets that mount up to something substantial. So you're buried in textbooks.
At the very beginning, like I said, I've really front loaded a lot of that work so that I could have oversight of it. Even within the tech, I had a pretty basic understanding of tech. I was all right at the front end side of things, not so knowledgeable about the back end. I was very insistent that from day one we built everything in house. So I spent a lot of time learning enough about how the back end infrastructure works so that I could talk about it with a sense of understanding. I also spent a long time learning how to do, in a very top level way, every single department's job. So I was like, everybody's had a manager. I think I said this when I met you last time. Everyone's had a manager that they hate, right? Because they don't understand what they're doing. And the manager's been like, I want this done today. And you're going, well, that's not how this works. And so I really wanted to make an effort that, especially as we were going to be moving quickly and there'd be a lot of pressure on us, that I wasn't telling somebody to do something that I didn't understand. And therefore I didn't understand how long it was going to take them or what the process was. So I spent a lot of time, doing the kind of boring, learning the accounting, the legal side, and then a lot of time learning how to do marketing, how to do paid acquisition, how to do the back-end infrastructure, how to do the front-end infrastructure, how to do the design work, how to do the film work, how to do the copywriting, and these things. And none of them in massive depth. I think, a good CEO is probably a jack of many trades in lots of ways because they have to have oversights of lots of things.
Many fingers and many little holes in the dam.
Right. I mean, the thing you have to be probably really good at is kind of being able to sell the vision and being able to get people to follow you in leadership and in management. And that's a slightly different thing. But you have to be able to have at least a little bit of oversight of all of these areas.
There's leadership and there's management.
Yeah. Which are very different.
Very different.
Very different. And actually, I think that a lot of good CEOs are probably terrible at management, but really good at leadership. Because, especially in the startup world, if you're moving quickly, especially if you work with a VC, they'll be like, great, people want to follow you, but we're gonna put a COO in your company who's actually going to do all of the management stuff. But that you can't have that in the early days. And I think that that was one of the things that I really wanted to make an effort to learn how these processes work, and learning about Scrum techniques and learning about all these other different things to try and help build a team that actually made sense.
You're taking a very very particular creative energy and you are channeling it into a relatively passive activity, which is learning and consuming knowledge and building your professional confidence. Was that hard in any way?
I had a very unique, well, not completely unique, but quite a unique reason for that background. When I was younger, I was a ballet dancer, and I studied at the Royal Ballet School until I was about 15. And what's weird about ballet, I assume it's true of any sport at a high level or any musical instrument. What's weird about it is you don't want to be told you're good at it by your teacher. Okay? Because if your teacher's like, oh, that was good, that's like, you don't want to deal with me. I'm not interesting enough. Whereas if you get told by your teacher, that's not quite right, point your toe more or move your leg in this way, then it's like they want to improve. They're giving me criticism or help to improve. I always saw if somebody was nice to me, if somebody said something was good, and this is maybe not unhealthy in the long term, but that was a negative thing. Whereas if somebody was critical of me, then I had something I can improve on. So I had this kind of weird context of I can only improve at something I am bad at. And therefore I want to focus as much of my attention as possible on the things I don't want to do in order to be good at the thing I do want to do. And in ballet, everybody knows nobody likes stretching. Nobody likes doing conditioning. Nobody likes doing these other bits. Everybody liked being on stage and performing and being a big performer. But you can only do that if you spend hours and hours and hours practicing pointing your toes and practicing stretching your legs.
There was an amazing Under Armour commercial with Michael Phelps, and the tagline was, "It's what you do in the dark that puts you in the spotlight."
Yeah, I mean, that's maybe like over-egging the romantic idea of running at night. Have you ever watched one of those like running motivational videos where it's like this guy telling you that you've got to get up and you've got to do what is, and it's this big thing. And it's kind of like half true. You do have to do stuff you don't want to do, but you've also got to do it in a way that allows you to do it. Like one of the things I was saying to somebody recently, that we were talking about New Year's resolutions, and I put a post on my Instagram story on the 14th of January of a pretty empty gym at 6 o'clock in the morning, and all it said was, the New Year rush is over, gym is back to normal. And the thing was, it took 2 weeks of really busy mornings in the gym before people gave up. And the reason that I think that is that people are really good at going all in for something for a short period of time and then giving up. But the only way to be successful at anything is consistency. Like if you want to be a bodybuilder, or you want to be a runner, or you want to be a businessman, or you want to be a consultant, or you want to do whatever, you got to do a lot of things consistently for a long time. So set yourself achievable goals. Don't get up and say, I am going to raise £1 million today, because you will fail every single time. Don't get up and say, I'm going to go to the gym for 3 hours every day for the next year, because you will fail after 2 weeks. Get up and say, okay, I'm going to go to the gym for an hour 3 times a week, or I'm going to go and do my accounting for half an hour every Sunday, or I'm going to go and do really achievable tasks that you can actually build on. You can do more after. You can always overachieve on those things, but if you set yourself unachievable tasks, then you just don't ever achieve them.
Achievable tasks are sometimes a byproduct of having failed in that task before. I now understand what's achievable and what's not. It's very hard to set yourself achievable tasks when you've just quit. Did you have any income living, like starting out UnderPinned?
Did I?
Yeah.
No, I was on the. We got investment in time for me to not have any real issues, but I didn't have any income when I started it.
So setting yourself achievable goals when there's no money coming in and you're uncertain of when will money come in. That's very hard. You want to do more, you want to achieve greater things, you want to spend your time in the best way possible. What are some tips to setting achievable goals from the get-go?
I kind of don't agree with what you just said. The idea of having no income.
You're not allowed to not agree on the show.
No, that seems fair. You're totally right. The achievable goal. What I was going to say is that you mentioned the idea of not having income and therefore some things not being achievable. And my point would be that means that you're not setting the right goals, because if your problem is that you don't have an income and you think that it might take longer than your current financial situation will allow for you to get to the place you want to get to in business, in the thing that you're doing, then that's not considering everything else. So therefore it's not an achievable goal, and it makes sense that it's not achievable because you're not considering the fact that you also have a life to live. Like one of the things I say to freelancers when I'm giving them advice is, the first thing you need to think about when you're talking about your finances and setting your rates is, how much do I need a month to live? Okay, I pay £800 a month in rent, say. That means you need to be making £800 plus food plus bills before you're even breaking even every month just to survive. Especially if you live in London, you're paying £1 million a month to live in a shoebox. And I think that's so what you're saying is like setting achievable goals. Often people focus on one vertical of what they're doing, and that might be like, my startup goals are this, or my career goals are this, but actually they need to be part of a slightly more holistic set of context.
So the goals are not just what happens when you open your laptop and start working.
Right. So with your example, let's say, okay, you've not got no income, you're trying to start the startup. So you realize that actually one of the things that you need to do is make sure that you're covering your basic income, and that should be part of your goal. Because if you crash and burn after 2 months because you have put everything, it's the Icarus problem, you've put everything you possibly can into this startup, you've flown too close to the sun, and then you crash and suddenly you've got nothing to back up on. Whereas if you just said, okay, I really don't want to, but I'm going to go work in a coffee shop 3 days a week and do 4 days a week of my startup, and it might take me 5 months to get where I want to go, but I've got a little bit of safety. And, luckily some people can rely on their parents to give a little bit of safety, or you can rely on a friend who can help you out and let you stay on their sofa or whatever it is. But you have to build those into your achievable goals. So when you set a goal, you think of it as a big task. You break it down into what does that actually mean. So if your goal is to start a startup, okay, and you know roughly what that takes, you've got some learning to do, you know roughly what that takes, part of your task should be, well, actually, I also need to make sure that I'm financially stable enough to be able to commit to this, because one of the biggest hamperings on mental health and mental well-being and your ability to think constructively is personal pressures, stress, and financial pressures and stress. So
if you're missing out on a call from a customer or investor because you're afraid the bank is calling you.
Yeah, and that's a big deal. And I think that if you're not in a position where you are kind of comfortable and or happy to a certain extent, you're not going to be achieving in a way that you could achieve. And like my reaction, which people always say is very weird, is that if I'm very, very stressed, I will quit all of the fun things that I'm doing in my life, and I will get up 2 or 3 hours earlier than I normally get up, and I will do all of the stuff that I don't want to do until I stop feeling stressed. And that sounds like a kind of crazy response, but the problem is those stresses will stop you from being good at what you want to do, and actually buckling down and doing things you don't want to do for short periods of time in order to mitigate those stresses is massively helpful.
And there's also a point where stress accumulates and the things that you enjoy doing are no longer enjoyable. You're with your partner and you're not being able to enjoy your time together.
Yeah.
You are with friends, you're going out and you're looking at your phone, or your mind is wandering. or you just don't sleep well because you know those things you should be doing.
Yeah, I mean the famous work-life balance question, which again for my business is incredibly relevant because that's a big problem for freelancers. It's how do you negotiate the terms of your life and work balance when you're the person that's doing the negotiation, and it's always tempting to push yourself more into work. And like one of the rules that I've set for myself is I don't really like working in the evening, so I try my very best not to. So I try not to work. I mean, I'll answer the odd email, I'll take a couple of phone calls after 6, but I won't kind of do any heavy lifting work after 6 p.m. And the kind of idea of a startup CEO should be in the office till 11 p.m. every night. But actually, if you're waking up miserable and you're not enjoying doing the startup side of things because you've lost all of your friends and your girlfriend hates you and you're financially stressed and you're all these things, then you're not going to be operating in a positive way. And I think it's easy to want to rush things and put everything into it. There's this idea that if you're doing backbreaking labor all day every day that you're going to be successful, and there's a certain level of truth that you should be working hard, but it's so important to look after your mental well-being.
So it all sounds well and true, and I want to believe you. Okay, I really do. I need some credibility behind it because these sound like great life advice, but was it hard earned or were you just born with the blueprint of how to get it right?
I was miserable for large portions of the first year of this company, and there were periods where I think it would be unfair of me to say that I struggle with mental health because I think that would be unfair on people who have more serious issues. But there were definitely periods where I was de-energized and incredibly feeling miserable about things and feeling slightly broken and feeling like, I felt like there were periods where I had loads of acquaintances and no friends, or I never made time for the people that I really wanted to see, or I literally drove myself to illness, like physical illness, multiple times just by overworking myself and not sleeping and wanting to have my cake and eat it. And I think that there were lots of times where, I would either overwork myself or over party myself and be like, I'm not willing to give up my social life because I'm doing this. So I'm going to do both full out and I'm still going to get up at 5 a.m. to go to the gym for 2 hours. You can't do that healthily.
You can do it once, you can do it twice.
Yeah, but you can't do it for 3 months straight. And if you try and do it for 3 months straight, you almost kill yourself. And I remember there was points when I'd come into the office and my team would be like, go home, Alan. Like, you got to go home. And I'd be like, what do you mean? They're like, you're obviously ill and like, you need to look after yourself. And I'd be like, but I'm not willing to forego one of these things that I like. I love being really fit and doing lots of exercise. I love working and I love being at the company and getting stuff done. And I love going out in the evening and meeting people and doing stuff.
What eventually got you to be more sensible?
So last Christmas, I was given a book called Why We Sleep or Why Sleep?
Why We Sleep.
Why We Sleep, right, yeah. I actually only read half of it because I lost it on a plane because I fell asleep. It was kind of that among other things. There was a number of things that were happening in my life. My father was and still is quite unwell. And I had a fair amount of responsibility around that, which is not something you want to be dealing with when you're fully focused on a startup, which is like a child, with lots of children inside it that are also trying to do stuff. There was a few stresses that were kind of really building up, and I was acutely aware that while I was kind of happy externally and other people were seeing somebody who was hardworking and doing well and it seemed like a positive story, on the inside I was like, actually I am feeling seriously drained and quite miserable and very overtired and ill all the time. And I read this book and it was all about sleep, and I kind of traditionally or historically had always loved sleeping. I would when I was at school, I would sometimes go to bed at like 5 p.m. because I'd be like, I can't wait to feel fresh in the morning. And I still try and do that. But it got to this point where I wasn't really sleeping very much. I was sleeping like 4 hours a night. And this was one of the things that really triggered it. I just reading about how important sleep was and how important it was to look after yourself kind of triggered a whole set of other things. And then it was more about like, how do you start to build structures that mean you can do the things you want to do while also eating relatively healthily and sleeping properly and making time for family and friends.
The 4-hour sleep thing. By the way, when you said the book that you hate the most, my most hated book, or the book that gives me the hardest time, is the 4-hour work week.
Yeah.
Different story. But when you say 4 hours sleep, right?
Yeah.
Why were you sleeping 4 hours? Because you were waking up, or because?
No. Because I would just be out till I'd be out or with friends or at dinner, and I wouldn't go to bed till somewhere between 11 and 1, and I would get up by 5 so I could go to the gym for 2 hours before being at the office.
Self-inflicted, so it's not like waking up because of stress.
No. This was completely self-inflicted. Like I was doing this to myself.
What's it like reaching to the alarm clock at 5 a.m. on your third night of partying and waking up for the gym? Physically, what does it feel like?
It doesn't actually feel that bad. It kind of feels quite drony. Like you get into like a position where I wasn't like partying crazy hard. Like I wasn't like this is not like I'm not going nuts. I was just kind of going out with friends quite a lot.
If you're outside of your house at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday.
Oh, okay. No.
I consider it partying hard.
That 100% would be partying hard. But this is more like I would come home and I would go and play Xbox as well. Like I wasn't going out partying every night of the week. That makes me sound way crazy than I am, way cooler than I am. I think the thing is like again, maybe from ballet, like I was quite good at inflicting pain on myself. I was quite good at being like very regimented, quite militant in the way that I organised my days. So I was quite good. Actually, I never actually struggled that much waking up at 5, and I still wake up at that time, but I go to bed at a much more reasonable time, much more often.
So the Albert that we meet after 4 hours of sleep, 2 weeks into this crazy lifestyle, who is he? What does he behave like? How is he different to the sensible, wholesome Albert that's sitting in front of me now?
I think that the difference is, like, I don't think that there was a point at all throughout this process where I felt my personality or compassion or empathy towards others was changed too much. Like I think the thing I was really worried about that I would be very, very short with the team or rude or annoyed or aggressive in some way. And I don't think that really happened. I think my team would testify to that. But what I think actually really changed was that I was actually just miserable. The real difference was like I just felt miserable.
So the joy out of doing the things you enjoyed just disappeared?
Yeah, and it almost was more like you're chasing something that will make you feel good. So you would like, oh, that achievement still made me feel good, but now I need to do something else that made me feel good. Like, you know, now I feel like being much more conscientious about how I look after myself means that I am consistently very happy. It's not this like constant ebb and flow of, oh my God, I'm so happy, to, oh my God, I feel so miserable. I want to go and do something that's going to make me more happy. It's much more now like, I'm going to make an effort consistently to, you know, I want to get home and cook for my girlfriend, or I want to wake up and read the newspaper and be happy doing those kinds of things as well. And I think that I recently shared an article on LinkedIn about making time for your friends and making sure you don't lose out on people when you're running a startup, because it's very easy to do that. And I think that it is one of the biggest things. Like, you might be going out and meeting loads of people all the time because you're always active and always busy, but are you kind of faceless? I think someone recently said to me that they should make a new American Psycho about the startup industry. And I think it's so true, because you have all these CEOs that spend all this time smiling and having a great time and meeting loads of people and working crazy hard and sleeping for 4 hours. And then, you know, there's nothing behind the eyes kind of thing. You're talking to people and you're like, you're just going through the process. And I went to a party last Halloween at a VC, someone around a VC's house. I can't remember who it was. And I remember walking around the party being like, this is so, everybody is like a shell. Like everybody's just telling me what they've achieved, but doesn't really want to like be friends or like have an interesting conversation. And that was like, that's so weird. So I think, yeah, the big difference is when you look after yourself, you can be happy consistently and you can have positive relationships. And when you don't look after yourself, you can still be successful, but I don't think you can achieve that kind of happiness.
So now we're a few weeks into UnderPinned, now looking into investment, learning everything you need to learn, still super energized. When was the first setback or regret? When was the first time you had second thoughts about going on this endeavor?
I don't think, I still haven't questioned doing this at all, ever, weirdly. But the first setback, so we had like we raised money quite quickly, which was quite rare for like from an idea to like straight away raise money. You know, we raised 150K to get going. But we started with a fairly large operation. So almost everything the lean startup told you not to do, not actually, but like we started quite quickly, which meant that we very quickly needed to raise money again to build this. So we raised our whole first round. It's quite a long rolling round.
Your MVP is the minimum viable product you needed to put out is substantial.
Yes, yeah, 100%, because our MVP is not, one of our major premises is that we're not just building a really good single feature, which is, what most startup gurus will tell you need to do. Build one thing It's really small, really well. But the problem is, within our industry, the problem is there's lots of things that do one thing really well. The thing that's not done well is connecting all of those things together. So like actually the biggest problem for a freelancer is that they don't want to spend time doing accounting, contracts, new business development, contacts management, project management, time management, tasks, etc., 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 etc. They want to spend time doing the thing that they do, which is consultancy or graphic design or copywriting, whatever it is. And so what we needed to build was this genuine one-stop solution for these people, which means that it can't just do invoicing, which means it can't just, and all these invoicing tools that say, make freelance admin easy. Freelance admin is not just sending invoices. If you think that's what your freelance admin is, then you need to rethink your business. Like freelance admin is running a business while doing a craft. The way I used to describe it to artists was like, think about Damien Hirst. Damien Hirst is not an artist. Damien Hirst is an institution and a business with marketing teams and PR teams and business operational teams and infrastructural teams. There's a huge amount of stuff going on.
The setback, the one that you couldn't put your finger on it, being so committed to what you're doing.
Right, yes. So what I was saying is, so this was a big operation we had to deliver quite quickly. So we had to deliver all of these features in a way that was culturally engaging, for community engagement, that had like genuine educational insights in it. So a huge amount of stuff going on. And what that meant was we were a long way off what would be considered to be an MVP for the whole product. So while we might be able to validate parts of it, it was going to take a long time. I mean, it took us till January 2020 to release a live version of the product. So from August 2018, that's quite a long time to release what is an MVP. And we had lots of betas and stuff, but what it meant was, in terms of raising money, was we needed a relatively large amount of money to run all the media stuff, to run all of the advertising, the brand development, the tech development. I was a first-time founder. I'd run this little company before, but it wasn't really considered a kind of startup in the way that you consider this. So I had to raise money. I think my biggest regret was that I raised the first bit of money too quickly and then felt a little bit stuck out in the middle of an ocean with lots of responsibility, lots of people that were dependent upon me, and not enough knowledge on how to progress raising money. And I think that investment is this like black box that nobody seems to understand, and everybody says they understand, and it's different for every single person. But my biggest setback was about 3 to 5 months in, when we were like, have we made this? Have we built this in a way? I don't have access to the VC world. I don't have access to the financial world. So how are we going to offset the fact that we've gone for an operational model that requires a fairly large amount of capital, but we don't have the links to capital at that point? So there were parts where I was like, actually, this bit of the business I didn't understand enough, and therefore we kind of made a mistake in the way that we approached it.
How soon did you raise the first investment?
It took 6 weeks from the writing of the pitch to raising the first
That's
investment.
quite rare.
That's like unheard of. But at the time, I didn't realize, like, it made me think that this process was easy, which was the whole process of it. We raised the money so quickly that we were like, this is not going to be that hard to raise kind of cash because our idea is really good and we're a good team, which just absolutely is not true. And raising money takes, even if you are in a good place, like, expect that you're going to spend 6 months raising cash. Like,
yeah. So 6 weeks in, you've secured $150,000, and what did you do with that money? Were you tempted to go and hire people?
So this was one of the other things that I set out with I had broken down financially every penny that would be spent for the first 18 months, which we've actually not deviated from that much from day one. So I set out all of the staff that would be hired, who were hired on day one. So we started with a team of 6 on day one, all fully paid staff. So I'd set out financially everything that would be spent on. So from like the office to the team to the accountants to the lawyers to every part of the business. So it was almost a kind of real business from day one.
How did you know how to break it into these segments and estimate how much it would cost?
Just loads of research. Like the first spreadsheet that I had, I still have the first spreadsheet that I made, and I literally, ironically, I color coded it despite being colorblind, but I broke it down into basic departments that I know exist, which was like HR, service providers, the infrastructure, and then the tech, which was and then there was a contingency which I built in as well, and I built in a larger contingency than I thought was reasonable because I thought there would be things I didn't have oversight of. But then within each of those departments, I basically went and did loads of research on how much will this cost, how how much is realistic with this? How much will this have to scale as we scale up? What are the, where will we have to go? And I think when you start a startup as well, especially again first time, there are so many costs that you don't even like think you're going to have to pay, or you don't consider them.
Like what?
I mean, literally like accounting, like how expensive accounting is. Like if you're running a business and you've got lots on your plate, like you probably can't do your own accounting. That can cost like fair few grand a year that you're going to be spending on getting all of your accounts in order. Things like, pensions on top of your salaries, things like, I don't know, like, the amount of money you're going to have to spend on the servers to host your technology, the amount of money you're going to spend on advertising, on asset development, on just the HR, on hiring a freelancer for a particular job that you need, on hiring, spending money on office supplies or cleaning or what things that you're like, oh, they're like extra, but all those things add up very quickly. Spending money on like lunches, wooing investors, like the amount of things that you have to do, and you go from if you're sitting in a room and you're doing a little startup and you're on your laptop and you're starting to build it, it's incredibly accessible to be at that stage. But to go from that stage to like running an operation, there are so many expenses that go into just servicing an office, that just go into like making sure a team are happy and healthy.
IT, softwares, man, it's practically endless.
Yeah, I mean, just think of the Adobe suite. We spend like £300 a month on Adobe. Like that's a lot of money.
Yeah, 300. It comes out to almost £4,000 a month, and that's a fraction from the initial investment.
Yeah.
Like it moves the needle, tiny bit, but
Yeah.
it moves the needle. Okay, so that's that. So the approach to capital, when do you raise it, how do you raise it? Of course, it is highly subjective.
Yeah.
Highly subjective. So very hard to give a blanket advice for that. Did you approach it alone, or did you get counseling advice?
Yeah. So this was something that made it quite. Again, I think this was kind of one of the. So like I was saying, that the kind of mistake or the biggest hurdle that I found was we raised this money very quickly, and then we needed to raise money very quickly, which turns out you can't just do. So our first bit of capital was raised from family and friends, and that's often the way, particularly with first-time founders, that they're people who will believe in you and know you well enough to know how you operate, and would trust in the way that you'll use the money.
How did you feel approaching family and friends and asking them for money?
I think I got myself to the point where I, if they asked a question that I was not confident I could answer, then I wouldn't want them to give me the money. So I wanted to make sure that I had oversight of everything that they wanted me to have oversight of for this process. I wasn't going in and being like, I've got a really good idea, give me some money to do this. I was going in and saying, I've got an idea, and I've got all of this that shows how I'm going to use this money and where this money's going to go and what it's going to be used on. Here are all of the contingencies that I've built in, assuming things will go wrong. Here's the risk profile that I've created in order to show that I'm going to try and mitigate the risk as much as humanly possible. Here's the pipeline of how I'm going to approach getting funding in the future. Here's the revenue model of what I think we're going to go into.
How much money are we talking about when you approaching a family member or friend? What sums are we discussing here?
In this particular conversation, this was for the full £150,000. So this was a fairly like sizable chunk of cash to take from family.
How many people are attached to that sum?
One person.
That's you're carrying some expectations now, at least, or you think you do. I mean,
yeah. This person is very much involved in the startup world, and I think we were very confident that they would say no. Like we knew that they would say no if they weren't interested. And that made a big difference, because I think that there's that thing of like, you don't want to ask somebody to do something when you know they feel in a position to say yes, because then you're kind of not really asking, you're kind of telling them, right? It's like, do you mind if I nip to the loo? It's not the kind of thing you say no to. So there's an imposition there. You're expecting the answer. Whereas we were very, very conscious that this would be a no if they weren't interested, and it was a no for the first like few weeks of it, and there was a lot of questioning where they were like, absolutely not. No, this is not ready yet. This is not ready.
So you're like, Albert, you're coming to Mr. Tile. Listen, buddy, there's this thing I'm working on.
Yeah.
I need 150 grand to make it happen. And then the response was?
Well, so actually we weren't looking for 150 grand. We were looking for, I think, 560,000 in total. And we were looking for them to be the lead of this round to get things going. So the first thing we came out was, business plan, the financial plan I talked about, and they said, no, I've got questions around this. I want you to be way clearer on this. And so I went away and I was like, okay, that's good. Again, that's criticism. That's something that's critical, which means I can learn, I can get better. And so I went away and learn. And our second investor was an institutional investor. So we went from who I'd never, which was a completely like random, cold, cool introduction, which is quite rare again. And so we went from what could have been a very kind of cotton wrapped experience with a family and friend to an institutional investor that had to go through a 6-week due diligence period. There was not a single hiccup in the 6-week due diligence period with the institutional investor. So I think that stands to show the level of detail that the family friend round took, because it wasn't somebody saying, here's the money, have a go. It was somebody saying, I expect there to be a level of due diligence on this that would be emulated by an institution. And so when we got to the institutional investment, everything was in place for that due diligence round.
So it wasn't about asking for donations,
No.
Charity for your side hustle. You were approaching it as a business from the get-go, upholding yourself to business standards.
100%. And I think, and that's, it comes back to that saying, like, would you feel comfortable asking for this money? 100%, I would not feel comfortable asking for this money for someone if I didn't have that approach there. If I'm doing a little project and I want to host a cinema night and I ask all my friends to chip in towards it, and it's probably going to lose money, that's a very different proposition. This was, I want to start a business. The only way I can make this business successful is by raising a fairly serious amount of money over the first few years, and I need to learn how to approach that in a really sensible way. So it was important for us that we went through that process.
Was it backed by a term sheet and a contract?
Yeah,
equity?
Everything. From day one, I mean, this is again like my head in the law books. We had a full share structure. We had an options pool for our employees that were starting from day one, which all had options that were vested over 2 year periods. Like there was a lot of legal and contractual stuff that went into this, because part of the due diligence process was writing out lists of every single third-party software we use, writing out lists of all of our share structures and our articles of association, and making sure that every part of what we were doing was legally well put together.
Were there parts of the startup journey so far where you were shooting from the hip, like so often happens?
Yeah, I think that I like to think, again, that I'd put all this time and effort into learning all these things, but you will always get questions and you will always be presented with problems that you don't just have an answer for. And I think that a lot of the time, shooting from the hip, I think is a loaded term, because it's like, implies you really don't know what you're doing. You're just kind of throwing it out there. But I'd like to think that I don't do that. But what I definitely do is sometimes go, don't really know what I should be doing here, but I'm going to give something a go. I'm going to make sure that it's not an absolutely nuts thing to do, and then I'm going to give it a go and hope for the best and see how it goes. And I think that it comes down to your approach to it rather than necessarily the thing that you do. Being able to go, okay, this might be wrong, I might make a mistake, this might not go very well, but I'm going to try it, and then if it's not going well, I'm going to know that I can change it. Like, I know that I can take criticism and say that it's wrong. But I think that what you can't do is be like pugnacious about it. You can't just be like, I'm just going to keep going down this route and I'm going to try this, I'm going to try this, I'm going to keep going, and not listen to the external influence, because every single part of this process is so iterative. There's so many influences that come in. You're always kind of shooting from the hip, but you need to make sure that once you've made that shot, you're readjusting for the next shot.
Fair enough. What makes someone a good first-time founder? And I'm not speaking in hindsight, the guy who or girl who exits.
Yeah.
What personality trait? You got some from ballet, you got some from wherever. What are those things you would say make someone a first-time founder, a successful one?
Confidence, 100%. The ability to take criticism constructively.
Which comes with, by the way, confidence.
Yeah. I think kind of a lot of it just stems from confidence. Because I know loads of people that I think are easily like clever enough to do interesting things, easily good enough at what they do, easily hardworking enough, but not nearly confident enough. And you are presented with so many points where you're going to be like, I don't know what I'm doing. Or you're in a room with an investor and you're like, okay, they just asked me a question that I do not know how to answer. Like, how can I be confident in replying to that? How can I unwaveringly show that I am the person to do this? Because a lot of business, a lot of building this is getting people to follow you, is getting people to believe in you, is having the confidence to make a decision that might be quite scary. And all of those things, it's just about, okay, head up, keep going, head up, keep going, head up, keep going. And I think making those, the ability to take criticism, the ability to keep pushing on, the ability to have really difficult times and keep moving is like largely built on confidence. The other thing is also, a lot of the time, you will be saying stuff that you kind of know is an not necessarily exaggeration of the truth, but kind of like your version of how you see the narrative. And you'll be talking to an investor who you know doesn't really understand your market, but you know that they understand that you are good at what you do, and they know that they understand how startups work. So you're trying to explain your business in a way confidently that makes them comfortable with what you're doing without lying, because that's obviously unethical, particularly when raising money, but in a way that you're kind of giving a story of the company that makes sense to them. And that there's so much confidence required to basically completely change your whole narrative so that you can make it accessible to somebody else. And I think, I think the confidence is actually like the key missing factor in most entrepreneurs. The confidence just be go and do something and try it.
Could you be a confident person that is coming across insecure in certain business endeavors and more confident in others? Could it be that confidence doesn't exist in isolation, but as a part of a coupling with a mission or a business?
I don't know, because I think that, when you first said that, my first thought was, I'm not good at graphic design, or I'm not good at marketing, so I'm not confident at that. But I would say that you need to be confident in hiring somebody that is good at that. And like, one of the most important things about running a good company is hiring good people. Like, you want the person that you hire to be better at their job than you are. Ideally, you want to hire people that are cleverer than you. But I think that, you can inevitably, there are things that I do that I'm not particularly confident about outside of my business. When it comes to work, I need to be confident about everything. And if I ever feel unconfident, if I ever feel that stress, and usually stress is born out of kind of a lack of confidence about something, that's when I will really buckle down and be like, okay, this means I've got a lot to learn in this area because I need to feel confident about it.
So we end up meeting room with that investor that asks you the question that you are unprepared to answer.
Yeah, and that's... And sometimes, and you will crash and burn a few times. Like, you 100% will just have, or you do that thing where you like stutter through a sentence for a bit, and then you're like, I know that sounded terrible, and with this conversation is now over, to all intents and purposes, because that person can sense it, they can taste your fear. So, yeah, but and you will mess up 100%. You will get questions and you just flounder. And like, I remember being asked questions and you just flounder, and you're like, I don't know what to say. And there's two things I've learned going through this. One is it is 100% okay to say, I don't know the answer to that question, but I can go and find out. Or one of my team members is running something on that, and I will get a full report and come back to you. Or I don't know something about that, but I think what you're talking about relates to this, and I can talk quite confidently about this, and we can come back to that later. Or, sometimes just saying, I think actually just being able to say, I'm sorry, but I don't know the answer to that question. Happy to find out. But linking it back to something, as long as it's something completely fundamental, like how much money do you need to run your company for a year?
Of course.
But I think what I learned is that, okay, one, it's okay to say that. But two, when you're asked questions that you don't know the answer to, that is like immediately something you can go away and learn. And although I think, like working with VCs often seems quite fruitless in the early days. Like, most VCs don't actually work with pre-revenue companies. And going and having those conversations is really important. And as a first-time founder, it's incredibly difficult to raise money from VCs before you've got revenue, because there's no track record, there's no commercial traction, etc. So, but go and have those conversations and make sure that they're really horrible and that you really don't enjoy them, because one thing that VCs do a lot of is they look for reasons to say no. And whereas private investors tend to have a slightly more an attitude of slightly more, I want to be behind something interesting, I want to be part of this, I'm looking at the team and how you're moving. VCs have a much stricter approach, saying we have a due diligence process to find reasons to say no, risk mitigation. So if you go through those processes, you will find the bits of your business that you are unsure of. And you might not think you're unsure of at the beginning, but they will ask you the questions that will be like, can you explain this to me? For us, we have a very complex media-led marketing system, right? Which means we have a very low cost of acquisition, and our cost per click on our media is between 4 and 7p per click, which is incredibly cheap.
That's like traffic for strange websites you'd see on who knows where.
Right, so that's
dark web type of shit.
Crazy. And understandably, the first questions we get around it are usually to do with scalability of it and how does it work. And it's literally taken me until last month to be able to articulate what we do in a way that is accessible to investors. And it's also taken me that long to nail down exactly how the funnel works, because it's relatively complicated. The way that the pools of people are structured is relatively complicated. And it means that there's a long process to learn how to, one, do it, but then two, talk about it. And the only way you learn how to do the second bit, talk about it, is by getting people to ask you really hard questions. So I think those, when you don't know the answer to a question, that is the best opportunity to learn something.
The role of the founder and the point in time, which I think you're getting to now, where you start to delegate some responsibilities. How do you trust other people to execute on your vision without getting into micromanagement?
Yeah,
and
this is something I was actually really bad at. I found this really, really difficult, because I'm a big old micromanager. I love to be part of every little process. In the first days, so for the first 6 months, I would write down a list of daily and weekly tasks for every individual every day. And they say that they liked it. They definitely can't have liked it. But I did that. I think in the early days when you're getting started, there is actually a responsibility to be part of all the process because people don't understand the vision, and particularly if it's quite complicated.
Also, you're allowed to demand a certain standard of work that only you can only meet that after you've worked really closely on something.
Yeah, and so I think that in the beginning it was very important, even when the team was expanding, to work very closely with everyone so that everybody was on board. But then it came a point where it was like, okay, my head of marketing, Leah Bernadette, she's like incredible at what she does, right? And marketing's one of those things that people think they understand it, but really you don't. And she's like largely the mastermind behind the way in which our brilliant content and brand, which is delivered by our head of brand and creative director, are translated to how they're marketed online. And in the early days, I was heavily involved with telling her, how we're going to structure the brand, like what the messaging needs to be, the narrative, and we worked closely together on it. And then it got to the point where I was like, actually, you are way more knowledgeable about this than I am, and I need to take a step back, but I really don't want to. And I know I'm still struggling with the idea that I have to step back, to the point that I was like kicked out of our main office. So I now have a little private office out back, and I like to think that it's because I'm important. It's actually because the team don't want me in the room most of the time. And it's because, so what we do now is we have like a few touch points a week where I'll talk to everybody and we'll go through stuff. But the rest of the time it's like, get out, Albert, please get out. Like if you sit next to me, I feel anxious. I don't want you over my shoulder. I don't want you telling me what to do. And so I found that actually really, really, really difficult.
How did she prove herself to you, and how did you carve the patience to let her do that?
Like luckily her, I mean, she's just an example. It's the rest of the team that are exactly the same. They got better at telling me to leave them alone, which is really important. And actually, I think potentially quite difficult to tell your boss to leave you alone. But I think it all started with the hiring process. So all the people that we hired from day one, I knew personally. In fact, Sifted posted an article recently on how I met my founding team, because it's all quite weird and wonderful stories. But it was this process of I wanted them to be people that I knew and liked, not just for the job that they did. And because of the way we were building this company, it wasn't the kind of like sterile Silicon Valley tech. It was a big bit about it was culture and community and how our brand looks and feels and how you interact with our company and our technology. So it was important that there was a relationship that worked, not just in a kind of strict business sense. And so, one of the other things that we did is we'd have like various meetings throughout the year just to talk about personal issues and or how people were feeling and how things were going outside of work. And what that means is you can then have slightly better conversations about it. So a lot of my ability to step back was them being confident enough to tell me to go away. And I think I found that really difficult. But if you can't instill your vision into other people, if you can't tell people, if you can't clearly articulate what you're doing, you need to work on that. So if you can't articulate it in a way that somebody else can understand it and take it away and live it, then you're missing something. You need to work on how to tell that story. It's a thing to say, like, old philosophers always say things in very complicated ways, and philosophy became simpler and simpler because actually to be really clever, to be really good at what you do, you can explain something in very, very simple terms. And so I think that a big part of it for me was actually how do you narrow down and clarify the whole proposition in order to be able to give it to somebody else to go and take it away and do something with.
Albert, we're nearly at the end of our time. Where should people go to learn more about what UnderPinned does?
Yeah, go to underpinned.co. If you're a freelancer, creative entrepreneur, side hustler, micro business agency, or clients that are managing freelancers, the client side will be released in July 2020, so coming up. But yeah, go to underpinned.co, check it out, look at our magazine, there's loads of interesting content on there, loads of videos of our community, so you can learn a lot before you commit to even starting your free trial. But also we're always looking for feedback. So I mean, this is something that really needs people to be behind it for it to be a success, and we want to hear how people work and how people use it. So get on the virtual office, try some of the beta features, and also tell us what you think of the features that are out there. So it's always useful.
What you guys are doing is absolutely remarkable. You're solving a huge, important problem, streamlining the work of freelancers and making sure they get paid for the awesome work they do. This is a big propellant of the whole innovation ecosystem. So we wish you all the best in your endeavors. We can't wait to see you here on the second season, taking us through the raising the Series A, completing a successful crowdfunding round, and growing your team, still working from the corner private office.
Yeah. Thank you very much. It's been really great to chat to you.
It's been our pleasure. Thank you so much, Albert.